In this demonstration, we're going to go in and we're going to take a look at Dashboard Designer. And starting here from the home page in the Business Intelligence site, if I hover over any of these, if I click on it and get it to work, hover over any of these, you'll see the little link, Start Using PerformancePoint Services, and that's where we want to go. So we're going to click that link, and it'll immediately fire up. Well, it immediately fires up because I've already run it, and so it's in memory. And now I get in and I have this button up here, Run Dashboard Designer. Dashboard Designer requires the .NET framework. I think it's version 3.51, as I recall. But SharePoint would not have installed if it didn't have that. So you just click Run Dashboard Designer. And now we're going to wait a second for this to fire on up. And you get this little launching where it's coming in here and it's testing the schema to make sure that you have what you need. Now we get this little pop-up for application security, and that's fine. Notice publishers Microsoft. Do we trust Microsoft? Well, we're going to this time. Yeah. Just kidding, just kidding. Now we'll click Run. Let Dashboard Designer fire on up. Wait a few seconds, and I'll pause while it fires. Okay, Dashboard Designer has started. And I minimized the website also. So let's go in and take a look at it. First off, what I'm looking at in here, this is an area of work. So we can call it a workspace, whatever. And that workspace currently is untitled. So if I wanted to save this workspace, I'm not really going in and saving a dashboard design at this time. But if I wanted to save this workspace, I can just click the little office button. And it'll pop up and ask me where I want to save it. And just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say I want to save it. I want to save workspace as, and you're all familiar with this, I'm going to save it to the desktop. And I'm going to call this Demo 1. Doesn't matter. Notice it saves it as a DDWX, which is a Dashboard Designer Workspace XML schema. And we'll save it to the desktop. I'll click Save. And now it's named Demo 1 DDWX, which is right over in here. All right, let's expand this out some so perhaps we can see it a little cleaner. Now we come in and we see we have what we're showing down here in the workspace browsers is this workspace is connected into, click off, watch the hover over event. When I go hover over data connections, it tells me I'm connected into Matheno Group Member Server, which is the name of my server, Data Connections for PerformancePoint. In other words, I am connected into Data Connections Library for PerformancePoint. So that when I go in and create a data connection, that data connection is actually going to be saved up onto SharePoint. When I hover over PerformancePoint content list, it's a list, not a library, then I pop that on it and you see it's, again, it's in the list collection PerformancePoint content, which is right here, PerformancePoint content. I make such a big deal out of that because as your users are going through and actually saving this different information, if you have multiple sites up, you're going to want to change the names of the content libraries on the site so that they match what's being saved, so that if you have 3 sites you're tied into and bringing this content back and forth, you don't want 3 libraries named Data Connections. You want to go through and add a custom name to that. Okay, so let's go in and just explore. Here's my fluid user interface, the ribbon, and this is standard across the Microsoft products. Sorry, that's standardization I kind of like. So if we come through, here's my home tab, and it's the standard thing in here. If I go add lists, now I'm clicking on it, and you see it's looking for a list up into SharePoint. As the existing lists are the only ones I have, there's nothing going to be shown down in here, so I'll cancel on out. If I had a sub-site, I would see that sub-site, and I could come in and add that into the workspace. I can also go through and remove and call refresh, which is just coming in and refreshing to see if anyone has added anything else up into SharePoint that we can share. Cool? So let's go in and create something. I'm going to right-click connections down in here, and I'm going to say New Data Source. Up pops my different data sources. See, the most functional by far is analysis services in here. And if I come over and say multidimensional, you see that's the only thing listed. Everything else is tabular, right? So we'll come in and we'll say multi-dimensions, and I'm going to say OK, and wait for the wizard to start. All right, the wizard is fired on up, and we've got new data source in there, which we're going to change the name a little bit later on. But the first thing it asks me for is the name of the server. I started SQL Server Management Studio while you were sleeping, and this fired on up, and I'm connected into Mathino Group MS, member server, and I'm connected into Analysis Services. And within Analysis Services, I have Mathino Group 2012 OLAP, which if you're not a BI person, OLAP is Online Analysis Processing down there. I distinguish this because we also have tabular on this instance of Mathino Group. I'm sorry, this instance of the server. So here's my cubes that I'm going to tie into, and I'm going to tie into operation, which has a number of measure groups that I'm going to play with. So the first thing I need is the name of the server, which is Mathino Group member server. Let's go in and tie that in. I can also use localhost and the dot, etc. However, sometimes they'll cause you problems. So it's probably better to get into the habit of typing in the name of the server. Now I've got the name of the server, and if I hit my down chevron here, this will run a test for me and come in there and tell me that I have, there's Mathino Group 2012 OLAP, which I want to tie into. I could have also pasted in a connection string down here, which, whatever, it's, you know, whatever you prefer to do. So now I'm going to pull this down, and I'm asking which cube I want to tie into, and we'll tie into sales. These are perspectives, actually, and I'm going to run test data source, which was successful, and I'll say OK. Now I'm going to go on over to properties, and notice I'm in the Mathino Group member server. I'm in 2012 OLAP sales. So let's name this, and I'm going to name it 2012 OLAP sales, just for the name of the cube. And now I can put this into a display folder. When I do that, I'm not actually creating a display folder up into SharePoint. Instead, what I'm doing is making these connections easier to identify. Some places, you know, we've got hundreds of connections, so you want to use your display folders. So I'm going to click Browse, All Display Folders, and I'll create. And now I'm going to call this OLAP Connections, and I'll say OK. And there's my 2012. Of course, I would go in normally down here and put some kind of a description in. You really want to do that, saying what we're connected into. And this person responsible, I'm just setting a property up here, and I'll blame Bob rather than Ron. Now I've got that in here. You see this little save icon? So now if I want to go in and I want to save my complete configuration, I can do it in a number of ways. I could right click on it and say save. Or, of course, I can go to the Office button and I can save all, or save item, save workspace, etc. So just let's go in and do it this way. Or pause. Let me show you something else before I save it. Okay, I switched over to our site, our BI site, and I went in down here in Mathino Group BI, and I'm in Data Connections, as you can see by the breadcrumb trail up here at the top. Now there's new data source. It is written already into SharePoint, even though I have not actually gone through and done the save in here. That is because Dashboard Designer is a bi-directional agent. It needs SharePoint to work. So you can do some stuff offline, but you lose tremendous usability up here. So we'll go in here and I'm going to right click in on Data Connection, and I'm going to say Save. And now we've got that 2012 OLAP. Let's go back over to the site, and I'm going to refresh the page. And now it's got 2012 OLAP, and if I pull down my little chevron up in here, now I have different things that I can set up and edit, etc. You see edit document checkout, etc., etc. And I can look at, let's look at version history. And there she is. You can see I saved it. There's one, and this is when I came through and first created it. And then I went through and I modified it. That is, I changed the name, etc., put it into this display folder. So it moves it on up. Unless we don't care about that now, let's get out of that. Let's get back over to SharePoint Designer. So now I have in here my 2012, and if I come back over to Demo 1, I'm looking into my workspace, and I've got this data connection folder, and there is my OLAP connection that I've saved. If I come over into PerformancePoint content, you see I've got SharePoint and Workspace. And if I go into data connections, I have SharePoint and Workspace is up here already because I created, and on Workspace is this data connection. It is here because I went through and I created it in this Workspace. Let me show you something else. New Workspace. It's asking me if it wants to save the following, you save the changes, etc. And I'm going to say save. And now I've got a new workspace. Let it come on up. Letter query. Just a second, I'll pause. Okay, now you remember I launched this workspace by just saying new workspace. And even though it's connected into the member server, now I'm going to go in and say add lists. And there's my data connections. And I'm going to say OK. Now, when I added the list to this untitled workspace, here's the original, I now see OLAP, but it's up there on SharePoint. When I click Workspace, the connection is not down yet. So if I want to use the connection, I've got to bring it down. So all I have to do is I'll just open it. I'm going to double click it, and we'll go back over to Data Connections. And now in Workspace, there it is. So now I can utilize that connection. All right, let's get out of this and get back over to the one we wanted. And I'm not going to save anything. Don't save. Let's get back over into our original, which I saved here to the desktop, and I just double clicked. And in a year or two, it'll start. Okay, so it's back up and running. And now here in PerformancePoint Content, if I right-click on PerformancePoint Content and I say New, notice I have a different selection of objects that I can create. All of these objects are the content types that I'm going to be using within Dashboard Designer. Connections are separate from the content down here. Now, coming through again, I can come down here and you see this marked differences. If I come up to my OLAP 2012 and I run marked differences, now the differences, if I had a difference between what was up on the server and what's down here now, I could come in and mark the differences. And if I do compare item, it's saying the things are the same. That is, my connection up on the server is the same as I have it down here. Let's modify something and show it to you. So if I come over to properties, I'm going to come in and I'm going to put new property down here, and I'm going to put in just a text property. It really doesn't matter. And I'll say OK, new property text, and I'm going to give it a value new. All I'm doing down in here is I just want to have a different instance, or that is a different characteristic down here than I had up on the server. Now if I click compare item, you see the differences. What I'm working with has a new property that's different than what on the server. Then I hammer this so much because if you have multiple instances and multiple people working with it, which is going to happen, and they want to go in and see if anything has changed, then they want to do that, which raises the issue of security, which I guess is a little bit beyond scope, so we'll get out of that. Anyway, so I've got this in here, and now I can come through and see I can do the different things. And by the way, I'm just looking down here on the connection. It would be the exact same thing if I was looking at any of these PerformancePoint content things, KPIs, indicators, reports, etc. So we'll come back in here, and we cover all those a little bit later on in other demos. So now I'm up in here and I've marked the differences. I can come in and I can look at permissions, and when I click permissions, we're going to be taken back into SharePoint, and here is my permissions groups that's telling me, you know, the different permissions that are applied within SharePoint. So I can come through and look at that. If I go to the Edit tab, now the Edit tab has my bulk edit, which really is so I can come in and I can edit things in bulk. And if I come over to the Create tab, now watch the Create tab change. If I move up to data connections, you see everything is grayed now except for data source. So I can go in and add another data source. If I come down to Performance Point content, data source is grayed, and from here I can go in and I would just click something like this, and I can come through and I can create that, which again, create that being whatever it is I created. Whatever it is I want to create, a KPI, a filter, a scorecard, etc., which we cover in later demos. So the dashboard designer is fairly easy to understand. Remember, when you're saving it, what you're saving here is a workspace, and I'm sorry, I have 2 instances running. Let's kill that. I have what you're saving in there is the workspace, and if you had some changes, such as I go in here now and I say, and I want to come in here and I want to close the workspace, remember I did some changes, so it's asking me before I close, do I want to save the standard Microsoft stuff? And I'm going to say don't save because I really didn't care about that property that I had. Now I'm back over to an untitled workspace, and I can come in. Before I close, let me show you one other thing. I'm going to right click on demo 1, and I'm going to come in here as properties, and it'll show it and the security, etc. That's not what I meant to do. I'm going to right click this, and I'm going to go rename demo 1, and now in here I can come in and I can rename it whatever it is I want to do, the same as any type of an object.